Alright, good afternoon everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another video. As you might remember, last week we had that epic B-roll sequence of my girlfriend cooking, or I guess preparing a mango avocado salad. You guys really liked that sequence, and at the end of the video, I asked you guys to let me know what specific tutorial or topic do you want me to cover in a future video. You guys gave me the answer. You want an editing breakdown. You want to see my process for the post-production behind a sequence like that. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Now, really quickly before we dive in, please keep in mind that this is not going to be a step-by-step, in-depth editing tutorial of how I did each and every little thing throughout that whole video, because that would take an absolute eternity. Rather, this is just going to be, you know, walking through my timeline and showing you guys what I did to edit this sequence. Just a rough sort of breakdown. So I hope you guys enjoy, and without further ado, let's fire up our screen recorder and let's get started. Welcome to Final Cut Pro X. This is where I edit all of my videos, and as you can see, this is the timeline for our epic B-roll sequence. In case you don't remember, let's play it through one time just as a quick refresher. Well, it might look like there's a lot going on, but it's probably not as complicated as it looks. Down here, this green track is our song, courtesy of Epidemic Sound. That's where I get most of my music. You can check them out in the link down below. And above our music track, we have all of these little clips that make up the sound design that you hear throughout the sequence. You know, those various whooshes, Foley, and other sound effects. These clips here make up the main track of our timeline, and this is where most of our footage is assembled. For this sequence, I color graded all of the footage using my Vintage Look 2 LUT pack, which you can check out in the description down below. Now, above our clips, we have some other things like overlays, adjustment layers, motion blur, and text. And then finally, at the very top, we have this one big adjustment layer containing our letterbox, or cinematic bars, as some people call them. I use a letterbox for a few reasons, but the main purpose for it on a sequence like this is that it hides the negative space above or below a clip where I've keyframed the position. Now, for this editing breakdown, I've gone ahead and duplicated the whole project, but without the sound design, and hopefully this will make things a bit cleaner and easier to follow. The first thing I'm going to do for you is highlight all of the footage in the timeline and click Command R on my keyboard, and this will bring up all of the retiming and speed ramping effects that were done to each clip. The color orange indicates that a clip has been slowed down, blue indicates that a clip has been sped up, green indicates that a clip is playing at its regular real-life speed, and these gray bars indicate that a speed ramp is taking place and the speed is changing gradually. And now that you know all of this, I hopefully won't have to explain exactly what I did to each clip in terms of changing the speed because, well, you can see it. Just know that most of the speed ramping done throughout this whole sequence is to either draw emphasis to a certain part of a clip or to play off of the rhythm of the music. So let's start from the beginning. You might have noticed that our first clip is above the main track that contains the rest of our footage, and the reason for that is because our clips actually overlap a little bit where I created our first transition, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The video starts off with our first shot fading in from black, and this was done by keyframing the opacity of the footage from 0 to 100% as indicated in our inspector. After some dramatic speed ramping, you can see that our whole clip starts to move upward, revealing the next shot, which also moves upward into the frame. This was done by keyframing the position of each shot to move upward simultaneously, while also using a shape mask to feather the edge of our top clip so that there is no harsh line and it falls off nicely into our second shot. This is what the transition looks like if we disable our second shot, and this is what it looks like if we disable the first shot. To tie the two clips together, I've also added this motion blur layer, which smooths out some of the motion between the two clips, and it also blurs a bit of that distortion that I did to the first clip. If you didn't notice it at first, I also added keyframes to the distortion of the clip to emphasize that rapid movement, which is why it kind of looks like it's stretching. But anyway, here is what the final transition looks like. So our second clip is where the knife chops the cucumber, but as you can see when played slowly, the cucumber is already chopped. There's actually a bunch of things that go into faking or selling the idea that it is in fact being chopped on camera in the shot, things like speed ramping, the sound effects, and the camera shake. I then added this interesting particle overlay and I changed the color to green, set the blend mode to add, and then finally lowered the opacity to about 10%. Once that was done, I added this little text effect that you see here, and all I did was place 6 little individual text layers on each of the clicks that you hear in the music. Then I just played around with the size and the position of the text, changed up the color, and then finally I set the blend mode to overlay. I also gave each text layer a slightly different opacity to give it a little bit of variation. So our next clip is fairly straightforward. Because it's a pretty basic shot, I felt like it looked a little bit clinical, so I added this motion blur over top just to give it a bit more grit. Now towards the end of the clip, I added this pan left transition layer, which you can see on these last 2 frames, it starts to shift the frame over to the right as if the camera were panning to the left. And because it happens so quickly and the focus is on the knife, you don't really notice the frame mirroring when it's played at full speed. While this little pan left layer is subtle, it definitely helps to lead us a bit more seamlessly into our next clip, which is also moving to the left. Now the pepper shot. This is something I got a lot of questions about. The original shot looks like this, and I did the best I could to keep the pepper close to the center of the frame. But with some basic motion tracking, I was able to keep the pepper locked to the middle of the frame, and after adding some motion blur, we get this really cool looking effect. I actually already did a full tutorial on this tracking plugin, so feel free to check that out in the description below. On just the last 2 frames of the shot, I used a slightly heavier motion blur just to give the illusion that everything is happening very fast. I also added the sound effect of the pepper rolling and then hitting the table, even though in the clip, it actually cuts just before that happens. So on the next clip, we've got a really subtle overlay. It's actually the same thing that we used on the cucumber shot from earlier, but this time instead of green, it's red. Our footage starts at normal speed, then rapidly speeds up as the knife pulls away, but notice that the camera also pulls away at the same time, and I've added another pan left transition along with some motion blur, and this really ties in nicely with our next shot, which also begins at that pan left sort of motion. Now there's not a whole lot going on here with this mango shot, just some speed ramps and a couple of whoosh sounds, but the camera movement in the shot is really what makes it look cool. Moving along, nothing too crazy here, just a regular speed ramp transition, but now this next section is where things get a little complicated. This little icon here indicates that this is a compound clip, and it's kind of similar to a nested clip if you were to use Adobe Premiere. If we double click on our compound clip, we can take a look at what's going on inside. We've got 2 clips in here, and everything that comes afterward in this sort of grayed off area is there if we want to use it, but it won't show up in our final compound clip. Now I had a pretty tough time getting these 2 shots to work together because the camera movements clashed, it wasn't seamless, so I'm gonna try my best to explain what the heck is going on here. Basically what's happening here on this first clip is the mango drops, and similar to the pepper shot from before, I added some motion tracking to lock that piece of mango to the middle of the frame for emphasis. Now you'll notice that if I pause on the frame where the mango is about to go into the bowl, we have this weird sort of blurry feathering going on with the knives and on the island over here. And the best way I can show you what's happening is by toggling our next clip on and off. And you can see that I've actually managed to roughly blend the 2 clips together. This was done by adding a shape mask to the top clip and heavily manipulating the position and scale of the bottom clip to have the bowl and the island line up with the previous shot. If I disable the top clip, you can actually see what the second clip looks like underneath. Pretty confusing, right? So what ended up happening is because the 2 shots had totally different framing, our second shot is totally cut off after we finished the transition between the 2 clips. And that is exactly why I went ahead and highlighted everything and then made it into a compound clip. Because that way I could then keyframe the position and scale of the whole thing to bring our next shot back into the frame. Now after I added a speed ramp to the transition, I decided to add this little PNG image of the piece of mango that I cut out in Photoshop, and I placed it in there literally for just one frame so we can see it just for a slight moment longer. So that's by far the most complicated transition in this whole video, and honestly, it didn't even turn out all that great. Nonetheless, it was a really good learning process for me, and it gives me a lot of ideas for future videos. Now, I apologize if that was really confusing and hard to follow, but hopefully it was mildly interesting to see. Anyway, after all of that, the avocado goes up and we have this film burn overlay. I had the overlay set to a lighten blend mode, and at the point where the film burn is at its very brightest, that's when I cut the clip and had the next clip start. I also went ahead and added a cross dissolve transition between the two clips so they fade together nicely with the film burn. Now, once I added a few little sound effects, here is what the final transition looked like. Moving along on this clip, we've got a little Super 8mm overlay on top because everyone knows avocados are super nostalgic. And then of course we have the dust particle overlay on the next clip. Now onto the honey shot. Now all I did here was copy and paste the exact same text layers that we used for the cucumber shot, and I literally just changed the words to honey and the color to orange. I also used that same Super 8mm overlay from before, but this time I scaled it up a little bit so we only have this part here. Then I changed the color to orange so that it closely matches the rest of our clip. Now there's nothing too crazy going on with these next 4 clips, we just have some speed ramp transitions and of course some motion blur to tie the clips together. And finally, our last 3 shots were left nice and slow to bring our sequence to a calm and peaceful ending. Okay, so now let's watch that entire thing back, but this time with all of the sound effects so you can hear what a massive difference it makes. Now, a lot of people ask me where I get my sound effects, and the truth is I get them from so many different places. I would recommend just going on Google or YouTube and searching for royalty-free sound effects. Let's say you want the sound of a vegetable being chopped. You can just go onto Google and type in vegetable chopping sound effect, and I'm sure you'll find something. And finally, let's watch the full sequence one more time with music. But the last thing I'll mention before I let that play is that over here on this part of the song, you'll notice that it is cut out, and I actually added a muffled effect on the audio, and this just creates a little bit of tension as the mango is falling, so you can look out for that. Okay, here it is. Alright, so a little bit of a different type of video today. I hope you guys enjoyed this little post-production editing breakdown. If you like videos like this, then don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Instagram at daniel.schiffer. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video.